Now I'm gonna jump off to Instagram and see what questions people have asked. Hope it's not too much. Okay, nothing's popped up yet. Okay, this is manageable. We can do this. 41 comments. Guys, you're mad. God, 41. I thought it was 4 when I said it doesn't look that bad. 41. Have you ever knitted with rustic Irish tweed? And if so, do you think it's suitable for colorwork? I don't know that I have. And I don't know if it is. I haven't tried. That's I guess what I got is technically tweed, but I don't know if it's Irish tweed. I just can't comment on that. I'm sorry. Do you have any plans for winter knitting this year? Which knitters inspire you? I don't really plan my knitting. I am planning some pattern releases for winter, obviously in the Mitten Club. I hope to do another Christmas mystery mitten or autumn related or something. I have some planned publications. In terms of what knitters inspire me, sorry, hay fever. I'm dying, guys. The pollen levels of southern UK this time of year is brutal. I'm suffering. So apologies if my nose tip is completely red and I'm like, it's a nice thing, I know. I am very inspired by Norwegian knitting tradition, so that doesn't come down to a particular designer, it's just the overall style. So often that will inevitably mean that I am influenced by the big design companies in Norway like Dale and Sandnes and Rauma, because they all kind of have refined and standardized some of the ways we make things. I'm trying to think outside that box and give perhaps more detailed instructions than they do. But yeah, that does influence me, whether I like to admit it or not. As for Norwegian designers, I do love the whole Vottelauget, everyone in there, even when they design other things. I think you know who you are. No, I'm not going to do special mentions, alright? You know Pinnegudi, I love her designs. Svenke Duell does amazing stuff. There is, oh, Tori Seierstad, I mean, she's brilliant. She's been teaching at Shetland Woolwich, so you know, that's... I'm really inspired by Kate Davies. This is not a secret. I love everything Kate Davies does. I think she's a utterly brilliant designer. That's a goal, you know, but a far-fetched one in terms of what I want to achieve. I really also like the work of Annemor Sundbø. She's not exactly a knitting designer, but she's written more historical knitting books from Norway, some of which are translated, some not. I'm really fond of the Socks and Mitten books by Nina Granlund Sæther. I love the Kofteboken books by Norway, so they are written by Lene Holmes. I'm gonna write the names here because now I just blanked completely. And I love Susan Crawford's work. This is again not a big secret. I think, oh, she never goes halfway, does she? I mean, you've seen her book. Yeah, definitely inspiring lady. I should also mention Isolde Teague. I was sort of introduced by Isolde's work very early on in my Ravelry days, and back then I think we were in very separate paths. And now suddenly it's sort of converged, which she's gone a more traditional route, and as well, I've always been in the more traditional route, but I've taken a more international route, and I really love the stuff she does now. I think it is excellent. And since we're already up in Edinburgh with Kate Davies and Isolde, it also makes sense to mention Kari Westermann. She's sort of Englishified her Danish name, so I think that's how I say it. But yeah, if you've seen This Thing of Paper, you know why, because I mean, the worst thing about that book is that you just don't know what to start with. Everything is great. I really just couldn't know. There is Anna Bergman of Tant Ultus, of course. She makes just the best sock patterns. So that was my answer to that, I think. The next question is, what do you miss most about Norway? Housing standards. I think everyone who knows me are not surprised by me saying this. I think, to frame it in a nicer way, I think the British population deserves better housing than what they currently have. It's sort of like people have come to accept that this is just how it is. But in other comparable countries, not just Norway, but other comparable countries in terms of their wealth, I guess, housing is better. The houses are newer or better renovated, not just like other layers, but you know, people insulation, and the proper flooring, not just put carpets over like squeaky floorboard, leveled floor, taps where the hot and cold water comes out of the same tap, not carpets in the bathroom, just not carpets in general, so you can actually clean, and no walk in with shoes on the carpets. Ew. Yeah, housing standards. I actually prefer going to Norway in the winter because it's warmer there, because we stay indoors, and indoors you just never cold in the winter, never. I do also miss bathroom standards in Norway. They just, everything is tiles, no carpets, nothing that can get moldy. It's all tiles. If you get mold, you rip out the entire thing and start again. There's no acceptance of mold. And they're warm. Norwegian bathrooms are too warm in my opinion. But yeah, they tend to be at least 25 degrees Celsius. They are kept deliberately very warm. Must come from the sauna tradition or something. People don't do that here. Bathrooms tend to be colder than other rooms. So imagine coming out of those showers. I also do miss Norway this time of year because it is the brightest time of year. I do not miss the winter darkness, but the June light, sitting up until midnight, and it's still fairly bright. I mean, the sun set in my region, but it's not very dark. I miss that a great deal. I miss yarn availability. This is growing more, and I'm continuously lobbying for getting more Norwegian yarns in shops that I love and respect here in the UK. I do miss just walking into a shop and finding a wall of finer, that, or just a supermarket and get some Dada yarn, for instance. That I think I do miss. And just being there when something comes out, instead of having to be like, Mom, Sunless did this pattern booklet, can you get it for me? And we have to argue about it for a month before it comes in my mail, 2 months after that. That's the thing. I miss my friends. I miss my dogs. I miss the scenery. But I think I have sort of crafted the adult version of me in the British London culture. I specify London here. I know London is a bit of a special case. I'm sort of the best me I've ever been in English, and translating that into Norwegian when I go back can actually be quite difficult, and I become more introverted. I become my teenager self. So it's not to say that I miss everything from Norway. There are stuff, there's a reason why I'm here as well, you know, even though I mentioned lots of stuff about Norway that I do miss. Would you recommend Steeking non-superwash yarn? There is no other yarn I would recommend. Only if you're not going to sew any reinforcement with the sewing machine, yes, I would only use non-superwash yarn. But not being superwash is not the only criteria. I prefer it being a particular fiber that is sticky when it's woolen spun. So the best examples of that is, you know, Spindrift from Shetland 2-ply jumper weight, Finul from Norway, Ask from Norway, Tove from Sandnes in Norway. There's, you know, lots of yarns that are like that. There's Whole Super Soft, JC Rennie, lots of steekable yarns that have that loftiness, the woolen spunness. I would not steek superwash yarns unless I have sewn it. Since I've got the Eleanor cardigan lay on the floor still, I might as well show you, for this is made in superwash merino and it has been steeked. And I've not tacked down the steeking edge, and you see what happens. The whole thing just unravels. Luckily, it's been sewn over by a sewing machine, so it's not going to rip out. It is intact, but not thanks to the yarn. The yarn just wants to spread everywhere when it's superwash, whereas non-superwash that has other qualities that makes it sticky will hold up. So that's that. Oh, isn't it a lovely cardigan? Need to make another one. And by the way, it does have those decreased darts in the back. You may be able to see them, I don't know, but I've gone on for long enough and we have so many questions to get through. What advice do you give for balancing student life and knitting? That is the question, isn't it? I don't. I do my best, but it's really hard because I have some attention span difficulties, and often I leap to my knitting as soon as that happens, and then I need to be like, no, now you put your knitting down and you do your PhD LE. So it's a constant struggle. I just do it. That's the best thing I can say, really. It's hard, but I just have to make time for the PhD. Knitting I don't have to make time for. Knitting always finds its way into my life, you know. As soon as I sit down and I realize I don't have any studying stuff to do today, I'll be picking up my knitting. So it's all about, you know, being strict to myself and say, do the university thing, mark those papers, write that thing, plan that thing, write those emails, you know. There's not a better answer than that. Balance is hard. Often I have to take myself out of this context. I can't stay in this room where there's yarn everywhere, so I'll go to a coffee shop or something like that. Going in the library can be quite nice. I have an office at work. It's just, I don't like it. How many pairs of mittens do you own? You know what? I have no idea. Somewhere between, I mean, we're definitely in 2 digits, but I don't think we're up to 50 or anything. Well, maybe like 20, 30. I have no idea. What a terrible question to ask. I'm just saying that because we're friends. What do you do if you lose your inspiration to knit, but you still want to knit? Or do you have periods when you're just not knitting? No, I never lose inspiration. I'm never not knitting. That was a very short answer. I really just don't lose inspiration. If it were to happen, I just cast on something new. Yeah. 1. What is your dream project and why haven't you knit it? I don't know. Maybe I have. I mean, I don't know. Just because I have too many whips. That's why. What is your favourite knitting event? I love Edinburgh Yarn Festival. I'm gonna say Edinburgh Yarn Festival. I love also the festivals in Norway. They really helped me out at the time when things were just utterly crappy, and I really did enjoy Vogue Knitting Live. But Edinburgh Yarn Festival is just a special one. I think they just think about knitters in every way, not just the shopping, not just what gives them money, but what our experience is. So having a place to sit down with your fellow knitty friends. Yeah. 3. How would you describe your ideal knitting project? Not too much purling, a fair amount of color work, primarily stockinette in the round. Be that a yoke or a mitten, or it could even be a hat actually, or sock. If I can just zone through stockinette, but with the odd few challenge here and there, that's pretty good by my standards. I assume you mean the process of knitting rather than what the end product would be, because that's like, I could just sit on a sea of stockinette, but obviously you can find yourself on Stockinette Island soon, and then you're stuck there and you just need some variation. So it needs to have something interesting coming up, which is why lice patterns, they're great. You know, the little dotted patterns you get in Norwegian colorwork cardigans, the little white dots on the black cardigan, for instance. Perfect rhythm. It's almost like a self-striping sock, you know. You just want to get to the next one, and you're just going to finish one, but then you get to the other one, and like, you keep going. 4. Give us your top 5 tips and tricks. I don't know. I'm sorry. I have so many questions to go through. I really don't know right now. Just measure your gauge. That's my number one. 5. Could you describe how an ideal day would be for you? Does not have to be knitting related. But it's going to be knitting related though. I would just get to knit and hang out with people that I love. And dogs. Lots of dogs. Do you plan on teaching more knitting classes? Do you think you might do design classes in the future? I hope to be teaching more knitting classes. I'm not sure if I'll have time to do it before I finish my PhD thesis. I will be teaching one in Perth Festival of Yarn, which is the one I haven't done before, which relates to your last question, which is not on how to design as such, but on how to modify. So that's what that class will be on. I'm going to take a sort of archetypical yoke pattern like the Marius or something. I'm not obviously going to give away a pattern I don't have rights to, but just say this is how a yoke is generally written in a Norwegian pattern. This is how I would modify it if I were to knit it for myself. So I will take a bit more of a lecturing role than I usually do, but we'll try a few techniques that will help you get there. In terms of design classes, I'm not sure what they are like. How do you teach people to design? Nobody taught me to design, I just did it. So, I know, maybe. What are your knitting agenda or plans for the summer? Some new projects in mind? Well, that relates to what I answered earlier, really, which is what I am knitting on a bunch of Colorwork things that will come out in the autumn. We're looking at a big Colorwork garment, possibly also a more conventional one. There is also the floof. I'm making mittens for the Mitten Club. I'm also preparing some other publications I've been asked to do. That's what I'm doing. Also, then there is my Make 9 that I posted in January on my Instagram feed. You may have to scroll down a bit, but I'm hoping to catch up with that soon. I'm kind of halfway through or a third through or something like that. New asks, best places to visit in Norway, especially for sites to sell it to husband, but mostly for yarn and knitting. I like how you think. I think maybe Bergen. Like, Oslo is my favorite place to buy yarn. But Bergen has the advantage of being in Western Norway, and Western Norway has all the fjords, you know, all the fjords you see in the postcards. So if you go there, you could pop by the Hillesvåg mill, but you could also see lots of amazing fjords. So I might just suggest that. There's also Rauma, you know, the Rauma factory is also in a very lovely landscape. So obviously I have to recommend Trondheim because that's where I'm from, but the yarn availability in Trondheim is not necessarily unique to Trondheim, but we do have a very pretty city. What is your favorite book on knitting, and do you have any tips on steeking? Favorite books, hang on, bear with me. Sarbevotte by Anne Borsgaard, Mittens of Latvia, it's big. These two cardigan books from Norway, Tant Ultrus Socks, This Thing of Paper, and honestly any Kate Davies publication. I just couldn't be bothered to take it out, but hopefully that answered your question. If I have any tips on steeking, well, I touched upon steeking earlier. I've talked about the quality of yarn. That is the main thing. Make sure you have a yarn that's steekable, and the best way to find out is to just steek a swatch. I prefer to do the crochet reinforcement, though it's not technically reinforcing, it just makes things look a bit tidier, which Very Pink Knits has a good video on. And once you do that, you just cut. That's all there is to it. What is your absolute favorite yarn? This is a very tough question for me to answer. The first yarn that pops to mind is Finull by Rauma, but then I think about how lovely their finer lamb's wool is. Then I think about Ask that is really similar to Finull, but it's by Hillesvåg, and then I remember PT2 that has been merged into Finull, and then all the Shetland yarns come to mind, like Spindrift and 2-ply Jump Away, and of course JC Rennie's Super Soft and Hol's Super Soft. It's very hard for me to choose between those. They all have their advantages. You know, the Super Soft yarns are very nice and lightweight, but not the sturdiest, but very steekable. All these yarns are very steekable. Shetland yarns might just be the happy medium, so I could possibly go for those. They can be a bit thick and thin sometimes, whereas you get a bit more bloominess, a bit more bounce to the Norwegian yarns that I just mentioned. It's really tough to choose, and I'm also really thrilled about the new Vilje yarn by Hillesvåg, which is their lamb's wool series that I am just itching to try. It's a bit thicker than lamb's wool by Rauma, so it's something entirely new that and just as I said that, my battery ran out and I had to spend a lot of time charging that battery and feeding myself, and podcasting is a pain. Stay in school, kids. Anyway, I was talking about my favorite yarn, and I think I wrapped that up by saying I don't know, I have many. Whereas the next question, which hand knitted piece are you most proud of? Favorite knitting techniques and books? Well, I just talked about the books. I think technique doesn't come as any surprise. I like stranded colorwork, specifically continental style, with holding both yarns over the left index finger. As for piece that I am most proud of, do you know, that's a really tough question to answer. I'm gonna just have like a very quick slideshow here as I am formulating my response, and maybe something will come up. I'm just gonna assume the slideshow is done now. I really don't know, but hopefully I've had something to show for here. I do have some like imaginary future things I hope I will be very proud of. Like I have these Latvian mittens. I guess that would also be an answer to the question about what would be my dream project, because that would definitely be one that I would be very proud to have achieved. Oh, this is nice. I watched your book podcast as well as your knitting ones. That's true, I did booktube before I did knitting podcast. I would have probably done knitting straight away if I knew that was a thing, but because I just watched booktube and I didn't know about knitting, I did book videos. So this question asks, what is your absolute favorite book ever? Also, you are such a confident knitter. Is there anything knitting wise that you have procrastinated learning or are intimidated by? Okay, first question, favorite book ever? That is a very tough question. I really love Astrid Lindgren books, but more so just because of how they affected my childhood. I don't really sit down and read them much today, but I do love all of her children's books. Lately I've really enjoyed Brandon Sanderson's The Final Empire of the Mistborn series, so I expect every book of his I'm probably going to enjoy just as much. So tentatively saying the Mistborn series, hoping that to be true. I love Dove Knitting in there. It's a Norwegian book series, roughly translates to The Raven Rings. It's been translated into a couple of other languages. I believe you can get in like Swedish and Finnish and Polish, I think. And there are a few languages. Sadly, English is not one of them. But when it is, I will be sure to let you know, because those books are flippin' fabulous. Same with Song for Adabu, but I reckon they will never be translated. I also love the Lunar Chronicles. I guess they're probably targeted at a slightly younger age group than mine, but they're brilliant. It's like fairy tales and sci-fi. Cinderella is a cyborg. Little Red Riding Hood is fighting like human wolf hybrids. Rapunzel is in space rather than a tower, and Snow White is barking mad. I also really loved The Book Thief. I love the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, but that's not fiction in any way. I love the Hyperion book by Dan Simmons, and The Hobbit is actually really nice. I don't care much for The Lord of the Rings, but The Hobbit I really enjoyed. Love the Millennium series by Stieg Larsson, you know, the girl who doesn't that. But yeah, those are some books that I really love. And of course the Harry Potter series. Do I have to mention that even? Oh, and also the first 15 Lives of Harry August, really good. You should read that. About the knitting stuff I have procrastinated. The answer to that used to be brioche, but now that I have tackled one pass brioche, I guess maybe intarsia. I mean, I have done intarsia. The problem was I was trying to teach myself intarsia kind of before knitting was on YouTube. So could be intarsia. I'm just avoiding it because I don't want to purl. How many languages do you speak? I only speak Norwegian and English, but I do understand Danish, primarily written, and Swedish, primarily spoken. So that answers the other half of the question. And are the other Scandinavian languages similar enough for your language that you can understand them? Yes, that would be Swedish and Danish. Icelandic is a bit too far removed to understand. Often Icelandic individuals are taught Danish, whereas, you know, in mainlands we are not usually taught Icelandic, so it's kind of a one-way street there. As for Finnish, completely unrelated to the other Scandinavian languages, we just don't understand each other. Pros of acrylic yarn. I don't like acrylic yarn. I usually talk about that in terms of the subjective reasons and the objective reasons. Subjective reasons only apply to me, so those are, oh, I don't like the feel of it. Mainly, I don't like how it feels, I don't like how it looks, I just don't care for it on a personal level, so it's just my thing. And then there are the more objective reasons, which is that it's highly flammable, so I don't think it's appropriate really for baby knits and things in the household, to be honest. But the main thing is that it's plastic and it's made of microfiber. And microfiber is a particular kind of viscous fiber that is smaller than the smallest unit of wool fiber. And wool fiber you could catch in the water filter, whereas microfiber is too small, so it ends up in our drinking waters and our seafood in us. It's bad. You've heard about like the ban on glitter lately. Imagine microfiber. Microfiber, not great. And inhaling that, having your little ones inhaling that when you made a blanket in it, not a fan. You do you, but that's where I stand. And so pros of acrylic yarn. most of the arguments I hear in favor of acrylic yarn I don't think is true. I think there are other yarns that are more suitable for babies, for knits, for being affordable. I hear all those arguments all the time, and there are ways of getting affordable natural fibers, and I prefer those because of it being plastic, not because I'm like, oh, everything has to be natural because I'm a hippie. I've offended everyone now. I just think things needs to be biodegradable for me to say that it has a place in the world. Hi Ellie, do you change needle size for the colorwork section of a sweater? Yes, I do. I always go the next needle size up. So if I'm doing stockinette on a 5mm, I will use a 5.5 for the colorwork. If I'm doing stockinette on a 375mm needle, I will go up to 4mm. Whatever the next size up is, that's where I'm gonna go for the colorwork. Would you like to share what your PhD research is about? I just covered that, so thank you for your question. But yeah, as a whole topic, I am in psychology, which is considered a social science along with sociology, social anthropology, that area. But we really do work in a very hard science kind of way. There are generally two areas of research in psychology. There are several, but you can generally divide them into two: the quantitative and the qualitative, and I'm working quantitatively. And the quantitative camp is more similar to the hard science, the biology and medical science. Some might say those are not hard science, only physics is hard science and that kind of thing. That's a debate for those who are into that. I'm not. Qualitative research is more interpretative. You get yourself more involved in the research. You read rich amounts of text and you sometimes maybe categorize it, you discuss it, you analyze it. It's good for case studies, talking to individuals. Gets more into clinical but also more philosophical work. I am, like I said, not in that area. I'm in the quantitative, which is something I find the general public has a hard time imagining psychology to be. But that is actually the vast majority of psychology research, which is where we get people to take experiments and questionnaires and we observe them maybe in a setting we have rigged, but generally we present tasks on a computer that people complete, and we get data that we analyze and put into statistical tests that we get results from, and we check if what we were looking for was true or false. What tips do you have for someone who wants to steek for the first time? Well, I just covered steeking earlier. Just make sure you use the right kind of yarn and you cut. How is your PhD going? Do not ask! It's okay. I'm not angry with you. I'm just sitting here knowing I should be working on my PhD right now. What are your favorite knitting podcasts? Ooh, tough one. Let's go through YouTube quickly. Ooh, I love A Homespun House, A Wooden Nest, Amy's Little Kingdom, Along the Lanes. Oh, I of course love the Stranded podcast by Amy Florence. That is one of my definite top favorites. I'm not gonna mention everyone. It's Arctic Knitting, of course. Just gonna mention a few. Brooklyn Knitfolk, Jacqueline, brilliant. Dunkelgurn is brilliant. Ooh, Fruity Knitting is great. Gotta love the Grocery Girls. Hawthorne Cottage, a Hey Sister podcast. I can't mention everyone. We all miss inside number 23. Let's just agree on that, but let's just... Katie can have her time, and if she comes back, it will be her choice. I love the new journal by Howie Locatelli, by the way. I haven't mentioned that earlier. I think maybe I have. Don't you just love her? I love Julie of Sweet Sparrow Yarns, Comet Bornea. I mentioned that before. They have a great podcast. High production quality there. Oh my days. I miss Junk Yarn and Katie Green's podcast. Kill to Craft, Knitography, Knitting Expat. I'm just scrolling through. I may miss some because I'm not going through this properly whatsoever. Nordic Stitches, Pin Feathers and Pearls. And then of course there's Sticky Therapy that I mentioned earlier. There is Tea and Possibilities and the Corner of Craft. The Gentle Knitter podcast is amazing. There is too many to mention. Woolenvine, of course. I will always stop everything that I'm doing and watch Woolenvine. You know, that's all I can say for now. I'm sure there are some that I am addicted to that I've forgotten to mention, but I think that's a pretty good rundown. I also have audio podcasts. I'm just going to mention a few. Nordic Knitting, they're in Swedish, they're great. Shiny Bees, perhaps my favorite English language knitting podcast. NH Knits is wonderful. Curious Handmade, of course, very pink knits, very interesting. Knit More Girls, we all follow them, I hope. What else? Yarn in the City, local podcast. As is Pom Pom's podcast. Stickkontakt in Swedish, I love Stickkontakt. They are utterly brilliant. Of course, I love Marta och Marta. I miss Stickpodden, also in Swedish, and Knit British, and Mrs. M's Curiosity Cabinet. I think that's all. I may have missed some again. So sorry I don't have time to describe any of these in detail, but if you're interested, then do check them out. Have you used Pirate Pearl Polwarth yet? No. Thank you. I think you're the ones who sent it to me. It is one of those skeins that I'm just coveting. It's just this big fluffy Polwarth yarn baby, and I love it, but I haven't found the perfect project for it yet. I need to have something that retains the squish, and maybe now that I have discovered brioche, that is the answer. I don't know, but it is a skein that I hold and love very dearly, so thank you. What advice would you give to improve tension when doing color work? Well, there are several. One is make sure your floats are long enough. Pretty much every beginner to color work I have come across that have uttered anything about this are usually more nervous about the floats being too long. They're worried about things becoming see-through through the front and are then tightening things up more than they should. It's generally, especially if you use appropriate yarn, which I've covered earlier in terms of steeking, it's generally not an issue if the floats are too long. It can be a bit problematic, but more problematic is when they are too tight, because then everything bunches together. So that is one thing, and what you can do to find out is, say you've just knitted some stitches, you have them on needle, this is your imaginary right hand needle, you just knitted them, and then you just shove all the stitches as wide as you can on that needle, see how well spaced apart they are. If they aren't that well spaced apart, your floats were probably too short. And I usually explain this in the class, that what I see from beginners who often make too short floats and then mistakenly believe that they are knitting too tight, what they then do is that they try to knit looser, but they don't loosen up their floats, and what you get is very long stitches but mittens that bunch up together, so they end up looking like this. This is a bit extreme, but this is probably the most extreme case I've seen, because they're trying to knit loose but the floats are keeping the mitten together this way and the stitches just become bigger this way. So you can avoid that if you make sure your floats are wide enough by stretching out your knitting as you work with it, as it's on the needles. You can even out, I call it blocking on the go. I've seen other people adapt the term as well, and I think it's a good one. So that is probably my main advice. I was also talking about using a larger needle size, because there is a truth to that color work is a little bit tighter, and that is where you do the next needle size. Do not ever try to just knit looser. Promise me that. As we discussed yesterday, how you knit sleeves. I use short circulars. I don't know why, but I only enjoy magic loop with mittens and socks. When it comes to sleeves, I save my sanity by using short circulars. So I will start with a 40 centimeter needle. I believe that's about, is it 32 inches? 16 inches? It's 16 inches. 32 is 80. Now I start with 40, I do top down, and I do 40 as long as I possibly can before my knitting screams for a 30 centimeter. I forgot what that's in inches, but yeah. And then I just do that until I can't do that anymore. And if there is a bit of sleeve left, I might just change to a 9 inch. My 9 inches are a bit fiddly sometimes, so I may use my 40 centimeter all the way through actually and do a bit of sort of magic loop with it. Modified magic loop maybe. I just prefer my 40 centimeter. But as I get down to the cuff, I will opt for magic loop again. And that is how I do sleeves, and which is also why I don't usually stay on Sleeve Island for too long. Hey Ellie, I'm a logistical engineer and it's my job to design warehouses. If you need help with your shelves and storage, contact me, Nora. Thank you, Nora. I'll remember that for the future, because this was a hot mess. I'm so glad I had people doing it for me, but in terms of measuring, I mean, But yeah, I know, sadly this is not a warehouse, nor this is my bedroom. So I'm gonna have to be an adult and do that myself, I think. But you know, when I'm a great big knitting business, then I'll call you. What is your least favorite object to knit besides a crescent shaped shawl, which you mentioned for ease of wear? I don't know, because I don't knit those things much, so it's hard for me to remember really. I just can't think of anything, because if it were something I could think of, it would be because I have made it. I think in terms of what I have on my Ravelry project, and yeah, no, I mean crescent shapes is one, just because I find I like to wear shawls in a sort of symmetrical way. I put them around like here, and then the ends come around like here. And the ends just become a bit too long, the shape is a bit too shallow. When I hold the shawl out, I think it has a bit of a funny shape thing going on. That's just why I don't think there's anything wrong with them as such. It's just a personal thing, completely subjective. I also struggle a little bit with raglans, although I have done a few lately that I've liked. It depends if the raglan completely finishes, so it goes all the way up here like this, you know, starts at one point and then spreads. I feel like it needs to already start with some width before it fits well. So sometimes I struggle with raglans. I also dislike shawls that are too asymmetrical, like, you know, triangles made on the bias, that kind of thing. Because again, the way I wear shawls, I like the ends to come down at the same length, and they don't with those shawls, unless I want to accept the little triangle end to come out on the side, which I also don't like, because I like symmetry. How many whips do you have? What is your ideal whip number? I don't know. Last time I had count of them was 20. Now I think we're closer to 30. My ideal whip number is under 5. I think I would be pretty happy with 3. But here we are. Don't be me. Have you ever worked with linen or other natural fibers? I have not worked with linen ever. I might, but you know what the kind of things I knit. Linen isn't really that suitable for that. I knit for the winter, but being in warm summers every year, maybe I should broaden my knitting horizon that way. Other natural fibers, I have only worked with, I assume you mean not natural non-protein fibers, and that would be cotton. And I don't mind. Actually, I hear a lot of people say that cotton is hard to work with and stuff. I haven't really found that. I don't mind knitting cotton. I generally just don't knit in cotton because of the shape you get. Cotton doesn't really have any memory. It will just lose all shape. The memory kind of comes back after a wash, but then once you wear it, shape goes out. It's frustrating. I have these beautiful cotton marias, very well sculpted to my shape. As soon as I put it on, it's just a big box. Why exactly are you not a fan of drops yarn? I tried finding it in your older episodes, but I couldn't find it. I'm curious for the reason. The reason is not the yarn itself. I used to love knitting drops yarns. I did it all the time. I had my annual drop sales order, all about drops, and then I just stopped because you have to explore other yarns as well, and I now have a budget where I can allow myself to do so. So that is the main reason. I just need to explore elsewhere. The other reason is that drops have a history of being a bit too inspired by indie designers and not owning up to it when people call them out on it. It's happened a few times now where they have taken designs from other indie makers and passed them off as their own. Their patterns have technically been theirs, but the idea and the styling is often so clearly taken from an indie designer that they should really own up to when people say, this is a rip-off, and they're just like, delete comments and pretend it didn't happen. And that is just not how you do big knitting business. So that is the reason why. I don't judge anyone else for using a yarn. If you like to, if that's all you can afford, fine by me, but I've just made the decision not to use it for the time being. And maybe if they change the practices, I will go back to it. Why not, you know? The other reason being also that they are a Norwegian company, and when I choose to knit Norwegian yarn, I tend to choose Norwegian yarns that haven't traveled the world, you know, that are produced in Norway by Norwegian fleece, and that is not the case with drops. So that's another reason. It's nothing wrong with them doing it the way they do, but again, it's about what I personally look for. What do you think about superwash yarns? Not my favorite, but I like them. I knit with a lot of superwash. I tend to have to go with superwash for socks because they often only make yarn with nylon with superwash yarn. There are exceptions, of course, which I mentioned in the past. Tookie wool sock, for instance, Fjord by Hillesvåg, Fjell by Hillesvåg. There are alternatives, but generally speaking, you often have to opt for superwash. Same thing with other indie dyed yarns. Non-superwash yarns are becoming more readily available from indie dyers, but generally that is when I opt for superwash. And also if I make summer garments like my Elinor cardigan, that is a good time to get out your superwash because superwash are less warm. They have basically gone through a process by various means that reduces the heat retaining qualities of the wool and also the water repellent qualities of wool. Wool is always breathable, but I find it's a little bit less warm when it's superwash. So I find that personally wool has more of its positive qualities when it's not been superwash treated, but there are still good things to be said for superwash treated wool, even though I personally don't need that treatment. You can still machine wash non-superwash wool, but there is something to be said for the appearance of superwash wool when you've added some hand-dyed, you know, speckles and pops and stuff. That is something you can pretty much only get, you know, in really vibrant colors with superwash. Though I have seen some very skilled dyers successfully dyeing non-superwash wool, but I'm not in the stage right now where I can say more about that. Moreover, of course, I think non-superwash wools are better suited for stranded knitting because you use several strands. You need some stickiness to hold everything together to look like a cohesive fabric. Superwash wool is very slick, and that is the main reason I personally don't prefer it. But sometimes you want a slick yarn, you know. It all comes down to what you want from the project you are working on. How do you choose what to knit next? If only I knew. I follow my muse. Sometimes I just feel like casting on, and there I sit here with 30 whips. In a more serious note, I do have a Ravelry queue. By all means, go check it out. That's where I try to keep track of things I want to cast on next. But things tend to skip the queue all the time. Some things never go into the queue. They go straight onto the needles. I can't really explain it. Could you explain what you Norwegians mean by color dominance? The Arne and Carlos explanation is not at all clear. That's what they are saying. There is none. In Norway, we don't mean anything by color dominance because we don't have that terminology. So what Arne and Carlos tried to say was that we just don't have it as a concept, but that I'm not so sure I agree with. I don't think we talk about color dominance. That doesn't translate into Norwegian. It's just not a thing I've ever heard anyone say, but it exists in the knitting, which is usually why people just say, oh, hold your yarn consistently, you know, hold contrast color above or to the left of your main color so that it will show up more. But nobody talks about yarn dominance. And honestly, if you are new to colorwork, you don't really have to think about yarn dominance. I still haven't wrapped my head around yarn dominance. I don't think it's the most essential thing to know about colorwork. If you're just dabbling in, just focus on holding your contrast color to the left or to the top of your main color. That is all you need to know, honestly. It's really not the most interesting thing about colorwork, in my opinion. So, what is the nicest thing that has come from starting your knitting podcast adventure? Everything. Everything. I have made so many connections and friendships and very important relations. I'm gonna get a little bit personal, not too much, but I have lived in London since 2011, and for the first 3 to 4 years I was mainly on my own. I did not know how to make friends in the foreign country, had all my friends back in Norway, and generally just didn't really leave the house. I don't like going to, you know, clubs and parties and loud places. I just can't hear what people are saying. I feel uncomfortable. And so not meeting people in the places where most people meet means that you don't make friends. I was a tad bit older than people in my year at university, so while I made friends with some, we rarely hung out outside of the classroom. Whereas when I started knitting and making the podcast and going to knit nights and yarn events, I have made more friends than I can count, and it starts to feel like I've actually made a life for myself. I just kind of had to figure out how to do it outside of where I am from in the big world. It's kind of sad that it took me this long, but that is the main thing I've gotten out of this. Yes, I have, you know, a reputation online now, business connections, a good foundation to start a career. All of that is wonderful, and I hope it continues in that path. But the friendships and the support and the feeling that there are people that want to hear what I have to say and are interested in what I am interested in, that is the most valuable thing for me. And also someone's asking how to hold my yarn with 2 colors. I hold them over my left index finger. Like I said, conscious color to the left, main color to the right. Like I also said before, do not make tutorial videos. You're gonna have to find elsewhere. But just look up Continental Colorwork on YouTube. Other people have done it before me. Yeah. Can you recommend any specific resources for Nordic colorwork knitting? No. There isn't really any. This is a bit weird. Like, I don't know what you mean. Do you mean a historical book, or do you mean a technique book or a pattern book? When it comes to historical books, yes, I can recommend Annemor Sundbø's books. I have 2 of them, I think. She's done Mitten books, and she's done more yeah, history-based books. They're kind of like, you know, a museum in a book, sort of. So if you're into the history, then definitely that. There's also, of course, Sarbuvotter. There is books about cardigans like the ones I've showed you. But yeah, in terms of history, those are the ones I would recommend. I also know that Terry Shea has translated the book Norwegian Knitting, or Knitting in Norway, something. I'm going to put it here. So that is something to look into if you're interested in the more historical aspects. If you're looking for pattern books, again, I would mention the same books that I have showed up here on the podcast. You know, the Sarbuvotter book, the Kofteboken series. But in terms of technique, those books just assume that you know how to knit colorwork because you're Norwegian, because those books are Norwegian. So that's not really a thing that I think exists. If you're talking about reference books, that is another option. Again, the books I've showed earlier. The traditional Scandinavian knitting book by Sheila McGregor. There is Charts for Color Knitting by Alice Starmer. There's also the Mary Jane Mucklestone book for Scandinavian knitting. That's a few. Do you block everything? What is your favorite way to block a sweater? No, I do not block everything. I actually hadn't tried blocking until I'd started this podcast. I knit very neat. I have a very, very even tension. That's one of the pros of being a tight knitter, I suppose. So I rarely need to, but I often do now. Since I discovered blocking, I block the things I have made now. I haven't gone back and blocked things I didn't block before. Some things just even out when you wear them, and that is kind of how I view blocking. I think it's just speeding up into what your garment will be like after a bit of wear. So that is why I don't believe in like aggressive blocking, as we call it, when you stretch things out completely as much as you humanly possibly can, like with a lace shawl. Because that will just bounce up again. Especially if it's garter, it will just bounce up. And that, I think, is the goal with blocking, is to get to the final shape. What happens with a lace shawl you haven't blocked after wearing it for a long time? It will kind of block itself. What happens to a lace shawl you have blocked aggressively when you wear it a few times? It will kind of go back up. And I think the two would look the same in the end. And that is the goal. And I think that is what we block for. So that's not really what you asked. So no, I don't block everything, but my favorite way of blocking a sweater is just soaking it, squeezing out the water first by hand, then by towel, and then laying it flat to dry. I don't pin it. I tend not to steam it. Steaming is the most efficient way of blocking because you just do it there and then. Nothing needs to really dry properly, a little bit, but not like a soaked sweater. And it's good to like fold down hems that I want to roll up and that kind of thing. And it's the most common way of blocking in Norway, actually. We don't really do the whole soak thing. But that's what I do. I just soak it and I lay it flat to dry. I don't see the point in like pinning and stretching and stuff because it's gonna be what's gonna be. So there's a comment in Norwegian. I'm gonna try to translate on the go. What do you think you're never gonna knit? Entrelac. I don't see myself doing entrelac. It doesn't appeal to me. Never say never, but that was the first thing that popped to mind. I don't see myself doing that. What yarn would you never have used? Anything made purely out of plastic. So we talked about acrylic before and that kind of thing. But I do of course make exceptions for nylon because I do want my socks to wear. And I sort of see it as a mental trade-off of the durability of the socks against the non-biodegradability of the nylon, because nylon is a huge environmental pain. But I figured if it makes my socks last longer, then okay. But in general, I will generally avoid synthetics that are not biodegradable. Why did you move to London, and when did you begin knitting, and what was your first colorwork project? That is an interesting question indeed. My move to London was completely on impulse. It was back in 2011, like I said, and I had been to London twice that summer. It was just after 1 year in my university in Norway, and it was a bit tough for me. I focused a lot on just studying, memorizing 4 textbooks a term, so like 8 in total. It was really, really hard. I found it too much to focus on despite having fewer modules than before. My dog died. That was really sad. It was the whole year not great, and then after that year I spent 2 visits in London that summer, and I really liked it. So I figured I might just apply for university. I don't care to follow the degree I started in Norway, which was also psychology, same pathway. I just kind of wanted to start again. So I applied to university here in London. I got in and realized, oh, okay, I just need to find accommodation. And they had a free student room, so I just booked that, and I had that for a year. And after that year I felt like I had been a really sloppy student and easily distractible, but actually I had gotten a first overall, which is like an average of A, you know. I realized I'd done pretty well, so I decided, well, if I can be a slacker here and do well, I might as well stay. So I stayed, and I dipped a bit lower in the second year, but in the third year I had first in every module, and those were elective modules. There was stuff I was really interested in. So that's how I ended up staying. I was just going to do the 1 year, but I ended up doing 3, so I had a bachelor's degree. And then I started my PhD, and here I am still doing the PhD. And I have no immediate plans of moving back. I have thought about Scotland, but I haven't planned anything. And now I have new shelves that I'm attached to, so I might never leave. So yeah, when did I begin knitting? What was my first colorwork project? So I started knitting when I was in school. So I think I was probably 8 or 9, and they had us made some headbanding garter. Did a bit of yellow something on a 4mm needle, lots of dropped and created stitches, a hot mess, never finished. So again, they had us knit later. I was probably about 10. I think I made a small blue hat, and it ended up being too small for me. So my cousin, who was just born then, got that hat. When I was 13, we went on a trip actually to northern Trøndelag, and my mom and my aunt were gonna buy some knitting for the ride, and I thought, okay, I want some knitting. So I got some black boucle yarn to knit in the round and make some leg warmers. I never finished those, but I do have the yarn somewhere, and it's like not the best yarn to teach someone to knit colorwork for the first time, because you can't really see when you have made or dropped any stitches, which I guess was the idea. All I knew was that I found it really soothing to just knit in the round and stockinette. And so then school had us make a hat again when I was about 14, 15, and so we made these felted hats, and they looked terrible. They looked like bowler hats. They were just awful. But I throughout I knew that I liked knitting stockinette in the round. I could do it without looking. I just liked it, but I didn't really persist. I picked it up sometime again, the same leg warmers actually, when I was 17, which is alright, but I didn't properly start knitting until I was about 19, 20. Yeah, 19. Because I lived at this school very remotely, and my friend wanted to make himself a rainbow scarf, and so my other friend just went like, okay, let's go get some yarn. So he bought that yarn in the town centre in the village, and I was like, well, I want to make scarf too, I like knitting, promise, honest, because I knew that I did. And so I got some yarn too, and I make this lovely striped garter shawl in brown, white, black and lime green. It was really cool colours. I gave it to my mum, and she had to weave in all the ends, because I just thought you could tie a knot and that'd be it. I've never liked weaving in the ends, guys. This is nothing new. So that was when I started knitting. I immediately threw myself into the next garter scarf, and I did one rib. That was my first purl stitch. And I started making a felted basket. I did some felted slippers. That kind of failed a little. The second one I made was all wrong. The first one's fine. It was a bit odd. there was a lot of free patterns, a lot of drops patterns, a lot of people's scrap yarns that were thrown after me. I kind of became people's yarn graveyard for a bit there. And I had nailed it. I made a lot of horrible things that friends of mine got. And I was into it. And then, maybe 2 years later, I wanted to do color work. I'd seen the Mario sweater a lot and I was sort of thinking that kind of thing. But I wanted to make my favorite band's logo. So I made this, just a foam cozy. And that looks maybe fine to you. Maybe you think, oh my goodness, Ellie. Well, you should have seen the first attempt, because I thought I could do this without a chart. It turns out I could not. That looked horrible. So I did it again. It's got the logo on both sides. But if you look closer, all the stitches just drowned into the actual main color. And so I had to pull a string through everyone. So it's not actually color work. It's a yarn that's been pulled through the color worked stitches. You see that? So completely cheated it, and the inside is absolutely ridiculous. I'm gonna show you. I mean, I think in the end I turned it into intarsia more than stranded color work. It's not great. I don't care about the ends because it lives outside this kind of old creative MP3 player that we had way back. So that was technically my first colorwork project, but then I had this idea that I wanted to make a Mario dress, and I felt totally competent to do it. And I started with this hem of the skirt, and it turned out really nicely because it was just alternating 2 and 2 colors. You do 2 red, 2 blue, 2 red, 2 blue, or every other color. 1 red, 1 blue, 1 red, 1 blue. That was pretty doable. What just happened here? I have apparently dropped the stitch from way back when. Oh, honestly. So yeah, I had to go at colorwork immediately, and I just loved it. There was a lot of failed attempts on that road. I did some alpaca mitts that I often use as my shame project, where I did all the rookie mistakes of, you know, too tight floats, knitting too loose, becoming too long. You know the story. And then I moved to London a year after all that, and I started missing feeling or seeming Norwegian. It's Norway, and I felt like knitting colorwork. That's kind of the story there. Have you ever dyed yarn? No and yes. I haven't really, but I did soak, well, it was dyeing. I dyed with some avocado pits last summer. Some of you will have seen that. I had a lot of avocado pits, so instead of getting a light peachy color, I got more of a peachy brown. And I think some of my avocado pits had gotten a bit moldy because they'd been in ammonia water without a proper lid. So that's it. Yeah, it could have been a more lovely color, I think, had I just sealed it properly. Lesson learned for next time. I hope to try proper dyeing sometime. I do have a number of friends that are either professionally or on a hobby basis into dyeing, so I hope one of them one day are gonna ease me into it, and I'm just gonna suck it all up and maybe dye myself some things every so often. I don't see myself becoming a professional dyer, at least not while I'm a PhD student. I just, yeah, don't see myself taking that route. I quite like selling patterns because they're non-physical items that I don't have to ship out. But who knows? Just right now, I haven't dyed, and I really truly believe that if you're gonna sell a product, you need to have years of experience making it first. So this question didn't ask me if I have dyed professionally or thinking of doing it. I just assumed some people might wonder, and I think if I ever go at dyeing, I will be doing it for a long time before I ever dream of selling it to anyone else. And then there's another question about what my PhD is about, which I've already answered, so hopefully that's okay that I'll skip it. Do you know a book, website, YouTuber, poster, blogger, or podcaster you would recommend to help someone who is new to colorwork get started, please? I'm sorry, I do not. You're just gonna have to search through tutorials on YouTube. I don't know anyone who's particularly dedicated to it. I do know Diana Wall has an excellent video on kind of all things colorwork. I don't know if it's the first thing you need to know about colorwork, but it's really, really good, and you should check it out, even if you feel like it could be a lot to take in as a beginner. But it's a thing I think is something you should know along the way. It's definitely essential knowledge. The thing is, I don't know about these resources because I personally don't need them, and I personally did not use them myself, and I don't know if you need them either. thing about color work is what it ends up looking like is what counts. So you finding those resources I don't think is necessarily going to help you. What you need to do is make sure that you knit with 2 colors the way that fits your already existing knitting style. So forget about all the resources, forget about everything. Take in some of the things I've said in this video, like where you hold the yarn and that kind of thing, and spreading out the stitches and loosening up the floats. Aside from that, you really need to make it work for you. So I think it's totally fine if you pick up one color and knit those stitches with that, and then let it go and pick up the other color and knit stitches with that until you're practiced with that. Then you can start thinking about how you hold the colors all together at the same time. That didn't come for me immediately. I didn't look up resources for that. That came to me maybe 2 years in or something. It takes practice. It's not like learning brioche where you just say, oh, hold the yarn like this and then you knit this and do yarn overs here and knit together there and burp and bark. It's not like that. It just is a matter of practice. You can't learn it all in one go. It just has to kind of come to you, and that means you need to persist. So that is my answer to that, and I hope you will have the persistence to do it, because it's totally worth it. And you see all the people that are doing it right now. It's totally doable. Are you going to Bergen Knitting Festival this year? I hope so. I really hope so. I hope I also can maybe be more Skeindeer there than just going as my private self, but I don't know. I mean, it's easier for people that are selling actual yarn, you know, or patterns that have a physical item, whereas I'm just like, I'm here, I'm famous on the internet. But that would be really cool. I haven't planned for it, but I'm hoping that I can make it. I'm hoping to. That's my answer. Where did you learn English? In school? It's a module in school. Like, we have Norwegian, we have maths, we have natural science, we have English. We start off when you're about 8 to learn how to like introduce yourself, and maybe 7, I don't know. Say where you're from, very sort of basic. We listen to cassettes with all the English kids speaking, because sometimes the English teacher is a bit so-and-so. And you just kind of progress. And I wasn't very good at English in school, I have to say. I didn't speak much in class when I was asked, and it wasn't really until I was more immersed in English that I felt good at it. So when we had visited London in school, for instance, I felt like I was really good at it. And then I felt, well, back to Norway and I didn't feel very good. And then we went to San Francisco and I felt like I was really good at it. Then I went back and I was like, I'm not. Same thing when I went to Minnesota and Thunder Bay and places I've been. But as soon as I'm back in Norway, I don't feel like I'm good. So for me, I've mainly just learnt it on a fluent level from just being around English as a language. Be it English class, media, and actually living in London. But the fluency came to me almost immediately as moving here, just because I am such a chameleon with accents, as I mentioned in the last episode. So yeah, that's kind of where that came from. When will you release the next set of mitten patterns? Well, last year it came out in August, launched each month from September onwards, so that is what I'll be doing again this year. What is the nicest anyone has ever knitted for you? Very rarely people actually knit for me. My mom actually knitted me a pair of brioche trousers when I was a baby. I haven't seen them, I just remembered it right now. I really love this though. This is my laptop cozy that my aunt knitted me, and it's the sturdiest yarn. I don't know what this is. Possibly a wool nylon blend. It's very strong and it hasn't pilled one bit. It's been in my bag so many times. It's been given really rough treatment, and it's held up beautifully. So that might be the best thing anyone's ever knitted me. It's absolutely perfect. I'm so grateful for my aunt to have made me this. She made a matching one for my sister in grayscale. I really like it, and my laptop gets to wear a Marius jumper, so nothing wrong with that. So that is all I have for all the questions. I'm sure I made this into a double episode, you tell me. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you like this kind of video, if I can do it again in the future. I thought it was really fun. It might be better for me to just get the questions a bit beforehand, so I have more practiced answers before I give them to you. But that's, you know, just down to me and planning really. But yeah, thank you so much for asking all of your wonderful questions. That was a lot of fun actually. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!